Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to start off by installing some parts that I got from i5 Garage, which will be the first mod on this motor, and then we will get into splitting the head from the block and inspecting the internals. So here I'm opening up some engine lift hooks that I got from i5 Garage. I noticed them in a Boost Brothers garage video and reached out to see where they got them from, and they helped me out. I thought they'd be a great addition to the build, make it easier to move and lift the engine up. I also picked up these clevis hooks off of Amazon to attach to my Harbor Freight load leveler, which you'll see later, just to make the process of moving the engine around and lifting the motor a little bit less janky. Also, I noticed when I pulled apart the head, the lifting points on one side of the motor are gone now that I've stripped it down, so these will take the place. You do need to have the secondary air injection system removed to mount these because one of them uses the bolt holes for that system. The kit comes with the two hooks and all the hardware you need to mount them, so it's pretty cool. It's relatively inexpensive as well, totally worth the money. Here's where you can see where the factory lift point mounts to the motor. Installation is super simple, it only takes about 5 minutes, and check out the results. And since I live in the Northeast, had to hit these exhaust manifold studs with some PB Blaster, because you know they're nice and rusted in there. So the next couple of minutes are really just trial and error of me trying to figure out how to get these rusty bolts out. Initially I tried the 2-bolt trick with the exhaust manifold bolts, but I noticed pretty quickly that they were too thick to fit both of them on there and get enough threads to get anything to bite. So I fumbled around with this for a little while longer and realized that wasn't going to work, so it was time to try something else. These things were in there pretty tight, so I went across and tapped them all with a hammer to hopefully break some of the rust loose, and then I took the bolts and tried out my new bolt gauge to see what the thread pitch and pattern was, so I can try to find some smaller bolts that will fit together on this stud. And even with all this spare hardware I have laying around the shop, I wasn't able to find anything, so I actually went and ground a few of these down in half so that I could easily fit two of them on each of the exhaust studs, which seemed to do the trick. If you look at these bolts closely, they're flange bolts, so there's a lot of extra material at the end actually that isn't threaded, so I just ground that away and it seemed to do the trick. Now that I'm able to fit 2 bolts on there cleanly, I use the impact gun to zap them together, and then they actually come out pretty easily. After I get this initial stud out, it's pretty easy. I just repeat this process for all the top bolts. The bottom bolts are a different story, and I'll show you how I get those out a little bit later. So at this point I have all the top studs out, and the bottom ones are really rusted in there. I left this in here just so you can see that it does not work, so don't waste your time trying it. They're too tight for the vice grips. Even if you try to lock on and use the vice grip as an opposing force, it doesn't work. But fortunately I do know what will work, and I was just being lazy and not wanting to go dig through my toolbox to get the right tool for this job. So I didn't film this, but to get the exhaust manifold off, I actually needed to get this bolt extracting kit with a recommendation from a friend of mine who's an actual mechanic and knows what he's doing. And it got all the bolts off of this super easily, and it works just as good on the studs as well. So I highly recommend, especially if you live anywhere where you have to deal with rust, that you invest in these kits. I think this one was only about $50. I'll link something in the description, but it's came in clutch twice now. Then I just repeat this with the other 2 studs that are in there. Just hammer it on to get it started, and they're reverse threaded on the inside, so they bite onto the bolt as you loosen it. It's pretty cool. With the studs removed, it's now time to get the engine up off the stand and take the timing belt cover, or the timing chain covers, and the timing chains off the engine so that we can split the head and the block later on. Gotta grab the pry bar for this, and just now that the bolts are out, gently pry the lower timing chain cover off. Right now it's just really being held on by RTV. That's what they use to seal these things up so they don't leak. So just be careful on the mating surfaces, but there's plenty of spots around the engine to pry at it that won't damage those surfaces. After messing with it for a little while, I noticed that the hardware that was left over from the torque converter was holding this cover on. So once I popped those last few screws out and popped this wire out for the crank position sensor, the cover came off without a problem. And now I finally get a good look at the timing chains. Everything seems to be in decent shape in here. There's no broken guides or anything like that. So that's a good sign that there's no damage, hopefully, within the head. This is also my first time breaking into a motor with chains for timing. I've only done like the 180s and obviously the 2.5 that's in the Porsche that are all belt driven. So it was interesting to kind of get a better understanding of how the timing system works on this engine. It's a lot less complicated than I originally thought, which is cool. But these chains should make the at least timing system be a lot stronger than those of the belts. And anyone that's used or worked on a 944 knows that the belts are something that you constantly have to be checking, and their service intervals are super short. So hopefully I'll never have to do these again. Once we get the chain out of the way, I just remove the upper chain tensioner, a bunch of Torx bolts, and I am greeted by a droid from Star Wars. So now we're moving on to the lower timing chain. This one's pretty simple, especially now that the upper chain is off. You just take off this main lower chain tensioner, and the other guides just kind of slide onto dowels. And once the tensioner and the guides are out of the way, it's pretty easy to get the chain off. So now it's back on the engine stand to finally get the head off of this block. Here you can get a good look at the lift brackets and those Amazon hooks I bought. Really makes lifting this engine super easy and safe. First up, to make it easier to spin the engine, I'm going to take out these spark plugs, and they were pretty rusted in there. You'll see in a little bit the condition of them, but you can tell it's been a while since these things have come out. So one of the things I didn't notice when I initially took the engine apart was that the cams have a little recess in them so that you can get access to the head bolt. So here I'm just turning the cams to line up that recess with the head bolts. You can get a good look at it in this frame, how there's little notches that my extension fits through. I was really surprised at this because after working on Volkswagens since I was old enough to drive, typically they don't do things to make working on them easier, so this was a pleasant surprise. After the first 6 head bolts came off the first side, I moved on to the other, and this is just another view of how that recess in the cam works. Just grabbing the magnet to pull all the head bolts out, and then we'll get ready to separate these two bad boys. Here is the moment of truth. We're going to see if this engine is junk or not. And luckily, since I'm editing this and I've already done all this work, I can confirm that it is not junk. There was a little bit of anxiety here because I did a 1.8T build about 10 years ago, and it took me about 3 engines and 4 heads to get a working motor. They had all had timing issues and interference issues and bent valves, so it was a relief to have a engine that was in good shape. You can see all the factory cross hatchings still in there. There's no grooves or no lip at the top of the cylinder travel, so yeah, overall I'm pretty happy. The head does have a little bit of carbon buildup in the ports, which I like to clean up and clean up some of the valves, but besides that, the next step here is really just to clean and strip all the rust and grime off the block and give it a respray, and then bring it to, I think I'm going to bring it to Precision Balancing and have them do a light rehome, and then get some internals in this thing. Thanks for hanging with me through the end of the video. If you haven't yet, be sure to like and subscribe. All that stuff really does help. And look forward to removing the rest of the internals in the next video and hopefully get the block out to the machine shop so that we can start putting this thing back together. Have a good one.